The pager dragged me out of a half hour of sleep, and Scout still beat me to the door. He was awake before my eyes worked, before my knees figured out the floor, before I had enough air in me to say anything useful about the hour. By the time I pushed into the treatment room, he had already made up his mind. He was fixed on a ripped glove and a dry bag dumped on the bench, not the diver drowning on dry land under my lights. I had never seen the man before. Water ran off his suit in thin black lines and tapped onto the tile. Then he coughed, hard enough to lift his shoulders, and pink foam spilled out over his lip. That changed everything. Somebody behind me said they had pulled him off a shallow flat north of the channel.
But the equipment is failing. I can't do this. Breathe.
6
Just
o'clock.
assist me.
If county paperwork got there first, the water would take the rest. The room smelled like bleach, salt, wet rubber, and that thin copper edge panic always carried with it. One of the night nurses had a hand on his shoulder and no real control of it. Another stood there with an oxygen mask in one hand and the intake sheet in the other, looking like she wanted somebody older, meaner, or less sleepy to tell her what this was. I took the trauma shears off the tray, cut the front of his suit open, and put 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was fast and thin. His chest fought my hand when he tried to pull air in, not loose and frantic the way a plane near drowning usually came in, but tight and punished, like something had squeezed the life out of him, and most of it had stayed gone. Turn him. We rolled him just enough to keep him from choking on what his lungs were throwing back. He groaned when I pressed along the ribs. He felt deep, real pain.
Don't write drawing.
And it was not a performance.
That is not.
Bruising
what
had
happened
already
here.
started to lift high across his
We
chest
are not
and down
covering
one
this up.
side, being in the wrong place with the wrong spread, telling the wrong
This is now an
story.
official
I counted
investigation.
3
Step back.
ugly breaths in a row and decided he
Logbook
still
stays
had
here.
enough of his
No one
own
touches
fight
it.
left that I wasn't stealing it from him yet. I opened one eyelid, then the other. He had sluggish pupils and gray, cold-soaked skin, but he was still hiding things. Recovery point? I asked. The nurse with the intake sheet blinked once and said, North Shoal. 4 feet, maybe less. 4 feet, sure. I looked at the foam on my glove, then at the bruising, then at his hands. Hands told on people. His were scraped up, but not soft. Pressure grooves sat at the base of his thumbs where gear liked to bite. They were a diver's hands, trained and capable. He knew exactly what he was doing in the water, and he knew enough to know how bad this was. Now, when I pressed lightly between 2 ribs, his whole body locked against the table before he could hide it. Useful. Behind me, Scout scraped hard at the bench again. He still had not gone near the man. That mattered more than most people in the room understood. I crossed over and crouched beside him. The glove lay half under the bag, the middle finger torn through in tight parallel rasp marks, the kind steel left behind. The bag was wrong too. It was too light. I picked it up once and felt the missing weight before I even opened it. My stomach dropped a notch. Missing gear meant a missing reason, and missing reasons got people killed twice. Scout touched the glove with his nose and froze there, then shifted to the seam of the bag and breathed over it, in short, careful pulls. Work, not magic. He knew the gear mattered more than the body right now. I broke the seal and found wet cloth, a clipped tether, an empty space where something important should have been. On the gurney, the diver turned his face away from me before I touched him again. Pain did that. So did guilt. Outside the clinic windows, beyond the parking lot and the marsh, the tide would already be peeling away from the flats, while county still slept on whatever lie got written down first. In another couple of hours, the survey crews would be out there slicing the morning into neat official lines. And neat official lines were how bad stories got buried. I stripped off one glove, pulled on another, and looked at the nurse with the intake sheet. Don't write drowning, I said. Then I looked back at the man, at the pink on his mouth, at the pressure damage blooming under fluorescent light. The water wasn't deep enough to do this. Not even close. I left the torn glove on the tray and the pink-stained gauze beside it, letting the room look at both. and still missed the point. The diver's breathing had settled into a rough mechanical drag that bought me minutes, nothing more. Scout stayed by the bench, head low, ears forward, attention split between the dry bag and the hallway like he expected the next problem to arrive, carrying a clipboard. Fair bet. I was checking the bruising again when the front door slammed hard enough to shake the supply cabinet. Deputy Maya Torres came in with harbor cold on her jacket and the red blink of a live body cam dead center on her chest. She dropped a county logbook on the stainless desk. "Volunteer pickup 0238, she said. "North Shoal. I need your intake and your signature before this turns into a report with teeth." The nurse with the clipboard stepped back so fast it was almost funny. County had entered the room. People always made space for paperwork before they made space for truth. Maya had a good procedural voice, which was flat and clean, with no extra drama leaking out of it. "You can have the intake," I said. "The signature can wait." She didn't argue right away. She looked first. She saw the cut suit, the bruising, the gauze, the glove, the dry bag, and the dog pointed at the gear instead of the patient. Then she looked at the gauze in my hand. "Why?" she asked. I held it up. "Because your log says 4 feet of water, and this says otherwise." She stepped closer to the gurney. The diver tried to turn away from her without waking all the way up. "Could be aspiration," she said. "Could be," I told her. "Could also be pressure damage, compression, or a sequence nobody wrote down because the easy version got there first." Scout scraped one nail against the floor. Maya glanced at him. "And the dog?" "The dog thinks the gear came in cleaner than the story." Her mouth moved like she almost smiled, then thought better of it. Good instinct. Smiles wasted time. She leaned in and studied the bruising for herself, not touching, just reading. That was another point in her favor. Some people heard contradiction and reached for rank. Maya reached for evidence. She didn't buy any of it whole, which was one of the reasons I didn't mind working with her. She read the recovery line in the county log under her breath, then pulled open the chart drawer under the desk. The current print came out first. Clean blue lines. Neat, official confidence. Then she pulled the older paper chart from underneath it. Salt soft at the corners. Pencil corrections bleeding at the edges. She laid them side by side under the lamp. The new chart showed the channel, shoals, and buoy line, all tidy enough to make County feel smarter than the water. The older one carried scars, water stains, and hand marks. A faded contour sat farther north than the current chart allowed, almost erased, but not gone. I leaned in. Scout pressed against my leg without a sound. On the gurney, the diver coughed, opened his eyes for one ragged second, and looked past both of us straight at the bag. He looked at the bag instead of me or Maya. It showed ownership, fear, and guilt moving faster than pain. I stepped in before the moment collapsed. "Look at me," I said. "Where did they pull you from?" He stared at my mouth like listening had become manual labor. His breath hitched. He swallowed nothing. He gave me 5 seconds, maybe less. His lips moved once. Then again. "North Flat," he whispered, and that was all. Then his eyes rolled back and the cough took him again. Maya let the silence sit. Good instinct. Silence usually meant she was thinking instead of building a report nobody would trust in daylight. She traced the ghost contour on the old chart once, then the current shoal boundary on the fresh printout. "North Flat isn't on the chart." "No," I said, "it isn't." I tapped the older paper. "That doesn't mean it stopped existing." She looked from the map to the diver to the pink gauze and back again. She was not convinced, but not dismissive either, which was exactly where she needed to be. Outside, dawn was starting to thin the black on the windows, and somewhere out beyond the marsh, the survey boats would be moving at 6 o'clock, whether we were ready or not. If that old contour was real, the water would rewrite the ground faster than County could rewrite the paperwork. Maya flattened the older chart with her palm and let out one slow breath. "The map lied," she said. I shook my head once. No. The map got old. The lie came later. That was worse in its own clean way. The mud took my first step and argued over the second. Cold black water slid into my boots from the top and clamped around my ankles while eelgrass wrapped itself there like it had been waiting all night to pick a fight. Dawn was starting to thin the sky, but not enough to help much. Marker 7 stood out ahead of us in the dark, like a bad tooth, rust red and leaning in the tide. Silas Thorne led with a flashlight he kept, low and mean, aimed at the ground instead of our faces. "Nobody calls it North Shoal unless they work from a desk," he said without turning around. "Out here, it's North Flat. Always was." Scout moved beside me on a loose line, not pulling and not lagging, just reading the ground faster than I could. The wind coming off the marsh had that rotten green smell eelgrass got when the tide chewed it up and left it to think about its mistakes. Somewhere farther out, a small engine coughed once and went quiet. I looked at Silas. He kept walking. That told me he had heard it too. We reached the pilings near the marker, and the mud changed texture under my boots, feeling less slick and more grabby, the kind that sucked back when you tried to leave it. Scout worked the edge of a torn raft of eelgrass, head low, sampling the scent in short pulls as he sorted mud from grass from whatever had no business being there. Then his whole body tightened. He let out a sharp, frustrated sound and froze in place so hard the line went still between us. A second later, he sneezed. Then again. Then, 3 times in a row, violent enough to rock his shoulders. He licked his nose, tried the scent again, and backed half a step, offended. "That's not like him," Silas said. "No," I said. "It isn't." I crouched and let the line slide through my hand an inch at a time. Scout's ears were up, but his nose kept breaking off the trail. He wasn't failing. He was getting hit from 2 directions at once. The eelgrass smelled alive, muddy, and human in places, but something oily kept punching through it. It smelled of 2-stroke diesel, fresh enough to be rude and strong enough to flatten everything else. Scout sneezed again, then angled his head toward the pilings and the bent section of steel mesh half buried in the muck. "You get boats in here much?" I asked. Silas snorted. "Only if they know how not to get seen." I handed Silas the line and stepped down into the colder water. It hit above my calves and found every seam in my pants at once. The steel mesh gave under one boot, then bit back with a low scrape that sounded too sharp in the morning quiet. Somebody had wired old debris together out here years ago, maybe to hold the bank, maybe to mark junk, or maybe because people liked turning trash into structure when no one from county was looking. Foreign object debris. FOD, if you wanted the clean term for filthy things with edges. My flashlight caught a drag mark across the mesh where something had been shoved under and not quite hidden well enough. Scout gave a strangled little huff behind me and sneezed again. The diesel smell was worse this low, trapped under the bank and the grass, mixed with salt, rust, and old marsh rot. I bent, got one hand under the wire, and felt synthetic, waterlogged fabric. I pulled, and the mesh fought me for a second, then let go with a sucking sound. What came free was another dry bag, smaller than the first one, scummed with mud and threadbare at one corner where steel had worried it open. Silas leaned in behind me just enough to see it and stopped breathing for a beat. "That from your diver?" he asked. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe from the one standing next to him." I rolled the bag in my hands, feeling trapped water slosh inside, around something hard. It was not empty, but not complete either. The zipper teeth were packed with grit. The webbing strap had been cut clean once and torn dirty after that. Scout had stopped sneezing long enough to put his nose toward it, then jerked away when the diesel hit again and ruined the reed. That settled it for me. Someone had come through here with fuel on their hands, or in their bilge, and stepped all over whatever human scent had been left behind. Maybe they did it on purpose, or maybe just because sloppy men in a hurry still made messes. The important part was simpler. The diver had not come in alone. Somebody else had handled the gear, moved the bag, and tried to bury it under steel and marsh trash before the tide changed its mind. I looked past Marker 7 to the flat water beyond, gray now, and almost innocent from a distance. There was nothing innocent about it. Not this morning. I tucked the bag under my arm, took Scout's line back from Silas, and said it out loud so neither of us could pretend otherwise. Somebody else was here. The scrape of rust under my knife sounded louder than it should have in the little exam room. Fluorescent light flattened everything in there, even bad news, but not enough to make it pretty. The second dry bag sat on the stainless table between Maya and me, leaving a dirty crescent of marsh grit and salt where I had dropped it. I picked it up again and felt the same wrongness I had felt out at Marker 7. It was too light. The first bag had been light in an absence kind of way. This one was light in a stripped-down, picked-clean way. Maya stood on the other side of the table with a penlight in one hand and her notebook closed under the other. She wasn't crowding me, but watching, which was a good habit. The room smelled like antiseptic, wet nylon, and that bitter metal tangier carried in after too much time around salt water and bad decisions. "You think this is the missing piece?" she asked. "I think whatever mattered got divided up," I said. "This is what didn't make it out." I turned the bag once more in my hands and listened to the dull shift inside. It did not have enough weight for a full rig component, but enough weight for a casing, a connector, or a fragment. Something worth somebody getting wet and stupid over before sunrise. I unsealed it carefully and laid the contents out one piece at a time. It contained a wet strap, a sand-packed cloth wrap, and a section of metal housing the size of a thick paperback, maybe a little smaller, ugly, with white crust and dull gray pitting. Maya clicked on the penlight and held it low while I braced the casing with one hand and used the back of my knife blade to scrape along the threaded connector. The rust didn't come off in flakes. The white buildup did, chalky and soft, smearing first, then breaking under pressure. Salt crystals packed into the threads. The rubber around the base had gone rough and tired. "That normal?" Maya asked. "Normal for something that's been sitting in salt water with the wrong company," I said. I scraped again, and a cleaner ring showed through under the crust, pitted all the same. You leave two different metals pressed together in seawater long enough, they start eating each other. Not fast enough for drama, fast enough to matter. She narrowed the penlight beam and followed where I pointed, not arguing and not pretending to know it already. That was one of the reasons she learned quickly. She looked where the evidence lived. The corrosion had a timeline to it, not exact and not neat, but not fresh. It had been more than a day in the water, maybe longer. It was long enough to tell me this hadn't just been dropped in panic when the tide turned ugly. Then I rotated the housing and found the cut. It was bright enough to look obscene against all that dead metal. It had a clean edge and fresh shine, with no salt bloom yet, no dulling, and no time for the water to chew on it. Maya saw it at the same moment I did. "That wasn't the marsh," she said. "No." I ran my thumb just above the line without touching the edge itself. Two opposing bite marks showed pressure from both sides. It was controlled and strong. Hydraulic cutter, or something close to it. I didn't need to say more than that. The cut told its own story. Somebody had tried to open the housing fast, probably wet, probably in low light, and stopped before they got all the way to what they wanted, or they got interrupted. The bag under the mesh made more sense now. Someone had split the contents, stripped what they could, hidden what they couldn't carry cleanly, and counted on tide and rust to finish the work for them. Maya shifted the penlight to the zipper edge of the bag. That strap was cut too. "Yeah," I said. It was a quick first cut with a dirty tear after, which meant they were in a hurry. My mouth had started to taste like pennies again. I hated when I was right in stages. Maya finally opened her notebook, but she still kept her eyes on the table. So he didn't just wash in with damaged gear. No. I set the knife down and turned the casing so she could see the contrast clearly. It showed old corrosion, a new cut, and marsh grime in the seams. He came in attached to a chain of handling, damage, and bad choices. The body told us the rescue point was wrong. This tells us the gear story was wrong too. She said nothing for a second, just wrote a short line and stopped. It was noted, but not buried, which was good enough for now. In the next room, the diver coughed once through whatever drug sleep he had managed, and both of us paused long enough to hear how much weaker it sounded than before. Time was moving, whether we cooperated with it or not. Survey boats at 6 o'clock. Daylight after that. That meant open water, open sight lines, and more chances for the truth to get shaved down into something reportable and useless. I picked up the smaller bag again and felt the weight that wasn't there, the shape of the missing center. Maya closed her notebook and looked at me over the table. She didn't say she believed me, because she didn't need to. The table was doing that part for her. I rolled the bag once in my palm and said the only line left in it, whatever mattered most, wasn't in the bag. Fog made the little dock feel farther from shore than it was. Salt hung in the air thick enough to taste, and every board under my boots answered back with a soft, wet complaint. Silas stood 2 planks ahead of me, shoulders hunched against the cold, one hand on a pair of old binoculars, the other resting on a piling slick with black moss. The clinic sat behind us as a blur of light and angles. To our left, a peeling warning sign on the fuel shed still read Jet Blast in faded red block letters, which was funny in a dead sort of way, because nothing out there had enough money or dignity left for jets. Scout stayed back at the clinic with the diver. I hated that split, but I hated leaving the dock blind more. The tide was dropping fast enough to show the dark ribs of mud between the pilings. It made a sucking sound every time the water let go of something it had covered all night. Silas lowered the binoculars and wiped them on his sleeve. "You hear that?" he asked. I had. A small engine echoed somewhere inside the fog, coughing high and mean, then cutting back like somebody remembered noise carried over flats better than light did. We moved down the dock without talking much. There was no point. Sound traveled weird over cold water, and men who worked in skiffs for a living tended to hear first and ask questions later. I stopped near the edge where the algae made the board slick as soap and took the binoculars from Silas. The fog was heavy enough to give shape to nothing and edges to everything. A gull screamed once out in the white, and then thought better of it. When the skiff finally appeared, it did so, one hard angle at a time. It appeared bow first, then a sliver of hull, then the dark line of a man at the tiller, showing no running lights and no numbers painted where honest people kept them. The outboard made that thin mosquito wine cheap 2-stroke engines always made when somebody asked more from them than they liked. The skiff slid across the mouth of the channel and kept going. They moved not fast and not slow, but just careful. Silas leaned close enough for me to smell diesel and old rope on him. "Tide's pulling out harder now," he murmured. "By the time the survey crews start their sweep, half that flat's going to be laid bare, and the rest will be too shallow to hide a coffee cup." He didn't say hurry, because he didn't have to. I kept the binoculars up and watched the skiff vanish into the fog beyond Marker 7. For a second, I almost let myself believe it was just some local idiot doing illegal morning work and hoping nobody cared enough to make a phone call. The engine note changed, though. It faded, turned, and came back. That part mattered. Men searching open water ran grids or drifted where the current told them to. Men checking on a place doubled back on it. The skiff came through the white again at a different angle. Slower this time. Close enough that I caught the smear of mud up one side of the hull and the low posture of the 2 men aboard. There was no shouting, no waving, and no lights. One of them looked shoreward, not outward. They did not look toward the flats where a body might be, but toward the clinic, toward the parking lot, and toward the side entrance where deliveries came in and exhausted staff forgot to latch things all the way when the shift turned over. I felt the whole shape of it click together in the part of my brain that had once been paid to notice ugly patterns before they took root. They were not hunting for the diver. They already knew where the diver had gone. They were checking the endpoint. They were checking us. Silas must have seen something in my face because he stopped squinting into the fog and looked at me instead. "What?" he asked. I handed the binoculars back without taking my eyes off the water. The skiff was already ghosting away again, swallowed piece by piece, until only the engine noise remained. Then not even that. Behind us, the clinic lights burned dull and square through the haze, looking too bright and too fixed. The kind of target people trusted because it looked official. That was the problem with official places. Everybody assumed they were safe right up until somebody practical decided otherwise. The tide kept dropping with a soft tearing sound along the mudline. The survey window was closing, and daylight was coming. A boat like that didn't make a second pass through fog for curiosity. It made it because something had been lost, and somebody intended to get it back before the water or the paperwork pinned it down. I started back up the dock, already moving faster than was smart on slime-dark boards. Silas followed without another question. "They're coming back," I said. Then I looked once over my shoulder at the place where the skiff had disappeared. Not for him, for it. Mine. By the time we got back, the clinic had that hollow, shift change feeling that never belonged to either night or morning. Too many doors opening, and not enough eyes on any one thing. Somebody was laughing in the front office in that brittle way. Tired people laughed when they could feel daylight coming and wanted credit for surviving until it got there. Somebody else was arguing with the coffee machine. I cut through the supply hall with the smaller dry bag tucked under my arm and the casing wrapped in a towel inside it. Scout was still with the diver and one of the nurses. Good. Bad, too, because it left me alone for the kind of work that always happened when everybody decided the danger had moved somewhere else. The storage room sat off the main corridor near the side entrance, functioning as half supply closet and half overflow graveyard for busted carts and old trauma boxes nobody trusted enough to throw away. The floor outside it was slick with a shine that did not belong there, with sanitizer dragged through by wet boots and mud mixed into it in gray streaks. I saw that first. Then I heard the footstep. It was soft, slow, and wrong. A rubber sole lifted from linoleum with a damp little kiss, like the building itself was trying not to say a word. I set the bag down behind a stack of box saline and killed the light in the storage room. My pulse picked up, but the rest of me went still in that old, ugly, useful way. There was one way in, one way out, and a side wall cluttered with shelving deep enough to hide a person if the person knew how to fold herself smaller than she felt. The next step came closer, then another. It was not the staff, because staff moved tired, distracted, and open in the chest. This was careful movement, with weight controlled and breath held on the approach. I slipped one hand around the handle of an old stainless supply cart and eased it free from the wall without letting the wheels squeal. The corridor light gave me a narrow wedge under the doorframe. A shadow crossed it and stopped. There was no knock and no voice. The latch moved a fraction. The door opened on a man in dark, wet clothes, with marsh mud drying at the hem of his pants and one gloved hand already reaching toward the shelves where I had been standing a second earlier. He did not look surprised enough. That meant he had guessed right about where the bag would be. It also meant the skiff pass had been exactly what I thought it was, representing a setup rather than a search. He stepped in low and fast, saw me when I moved, and came straight for the bag. He offered no speech and no warning, just work. I caught one shoulder with my forearm and felt compact muscle under soaked fabric, belonging to a man built for balance on bad surfaces. He drove me back into the shelving, hard enough to rattle boxes loose. One split and dumped gauze at our feet like the room had started molting. He smelled like two-stroke exhaust, wet rope, and cold metal. His free hand clawed for the strap under my arm. I clenched my jaw against the impact and jammed the heel of my palm into his jaw, not to win, just to buy half a second, and my boot slid a little on the floor. That mattered. The sanitizer and marsh filth had turned the linoleum mean, feeling slick in one direction and sticky in the next. I let him shove me once more, fed him the angle he wanted, then yanked the cart hard across the wet floor, with everything I had in my left arm. Stainless steel wheels hit the gray smear under us and kept going. The cart slammed into his knees with a deep, ugly clang. His footing went out from under him all at once. He hit the floor shoulder first, then hip, then the back of his head with a curse that came out more grunt than language. I went down with him halfway, barked my shin on the lower shelf, and felt skin split under my scrub pants. Good enough. Alive counted. He tried to roll toward the bag anyway. A dedicated bastard. I kicked the cart again and sent it skidding into him a second time, pinning one leg long enough for me to drag the dry bag backward by its strap. Then a siren flared outside, sounding close, probably county rolling past on something unrelated. But volume is volume when you are breaking into a clinic before breakfast. He heard it. So did I. His whole calculation changed in front of me. He had to recover first and not stay exposed. He shoved the cart off with both hands, scrambled up on one knee, and limped for the door without looking back. Something metallic dropped out of his pocket and spun across the floor, ringing once before it died under the bottom shelf. It was a cutter head. It was compact and greased, with fresh mud in the hinge. By the time I lunged for the doorway, he was already gone into the waking noise of the corridor, just another shadow among people too tired to understand what they had nearly walked into. I picked up the drop tool, felt its weight, then looked at the bag still clutched under my arm. My shin was bleeding into my sock. The floor stank of alcohol and marsh rot. He hadn't gotten what he came for, which was nice. What he had left told me more, way more, actually, than what he had managed to take. The smell hit before the mud did. Rot, sulfur, and that sewer egg stink anaerobic flats kicked up when the tide peeled back and exposed something old and mean underneath. By the time Maya, Silas, and I stepped off the last patch of honest ground, my boots were already sinking past the tread, and the black muck was sucking at the rubber like it wanted to keep us. North Flat looked less like a place than an infection spreading under the morning fog. The old buoy at 7 leaned out of the white in short, rusty glimpses, and everything between here and there felt temporary. Maya had her body cam on and her sidearm sealed, where it belonged unless life got stupid. Silas carried a boathook and a flashlight, though the light mostly just made the mist glow. I had the smaller bag strapped crosswise under my jacket, and my shin taped badly enough to pass for fine. The first step forward took muscle. The second took more. The muck held on when I lifted, making each foot come free with a wet inward pop that sounded too close to a body pulling loose from suction. Somewhere under that stink, the tide made a low, dragging noise against steel I still couldn't see. We kept moving, because stopping out there was its own way of getting trapped. The ground looked flat from the clinic, from the dock, and from every clean line on the paper chart. But the real place was chopped up with shallow runnels, old pilings, mats of eelgrass, and sections of stamped steel mesh half buried where somebody once tried to armor the edge and only succeeded in making it uglier. Every few yards, the muck changed character. One patch took the whole soul. The next sheared sideways and threatened to dump you on your hip. Silas pointed with the hook instead of talking much. "Not there," he muttered once. "That's soft." Maya stayed a step behind me and to the left, close enough to help if I went down, but far enough not to get dragged in with me. I made myself breathe before each pull free. Target fixation. I said it in my head because I needed the reminder. Don't lock on to the buoy. Don't lock on to the skiff. Don't decide the answer is straight ahead just because the clock is mean and the ground is worse. That was how people got buried in their own certainty. The fog shifted, thinned for a second, and showed a low, dark shape out on the channel edge, revealing the skiff. Then it disappeared again. The first shot didn't sound cinematic. It sounded flat, and ugly, like somebody slamming sheet metal in the next room. A heartbeat later, a round hit the rusted mesh, 10 yards to our right, and spat orange flecks into the fog. Maya swore once and dropped low. Silas grabbed my sleeve and yanked me toward a twisted rack of steel, sunk at an angle in the sludge. We did not run. Nobody could have run out there, unless they wanted to lose a boot and maybe a knee with it. We lurched, dragged, and half fell our way to cover, while the skiff engine revved somewhere unseen. Another shot cracked through the mist and punched into the mesh above us with a hard metallic snap. It was not aimed to kill, but served as a warning and suppressive fire to pin us where the ground was already doing half the work. I went down on one palm and felt cold brine ooze through the glove. Maya slid in beside me, breath clipped but controlled, one hand on the steel brace over her head, not reaching for the weapon she knew she couldn't use cleanly from this angle. Silas crouched on my other side, boots buried to the ankle, jaw tight. "They're hurting us," he said. He was right. The shots were walking the open route, not us. I eased my head just far enough to see through a gap in the bent steel. The skiff sat broadside in the fog now, looking more shadow than boat, with one man low at the stern and another forward with the gun braced and patient. They had cleaner water, and we had bad footing, bad distance, and nowhere to put speed even if we had been dumb enough to try. The tide was still draining off the flat, pulling little rivers around the steel and making every exposed strip of sludge shine. If we backed the way we came, they could keep us in the open the whole time. If we pushed forward, the ground narrowed between old metal and deeper suck. Choice narrowed, which was what they wanted. They wanted control, not bodies. I could feel my heartbeat in the cut on my shin and taste the sulfur in the back of my throat. Maya looked at me once, not asking permission, just checking whether I saw the same shape she did. I did. The skiff had not just found us. It had taken the exit and was waiting for us to make a worse mistake. I kept my voice low and said it anyway. "They've got our way out covered." We found him by the buoy because the blood showed before the body did. It was not bright red, but dark, diluted, and threaded into the wet mud, where the tide had worried it thin and kept dragging at it anyway. Buoy 7 leaned overhead on its rusted stem, chain ticking now and then when the water shifted under it. The diver lay crumpled against the base, like he had folded there and never managed to unfold again. One arm was trapped under him. The other was stretched toward the steelwork below the buoy, fingers sunk wrist deep in slime and shell grit. Maya dropped to one knee on the firmer patch and scanned the fog and the waterline before she touched anything. It was a good habit. I went straight to the man. His face had gone the color of old wax. There was blood drying at one ear, more at the split seam of his suit, and every breath came with the same ruined catch I had heard back at the clinic, only weaker now, showing less fight in it and more damage. "Easy," I said, though he wasn't making this hard on purpose. When I slid my hand under his neck, his skin felt cold enough to worry and hot enough to say shock had already started spending the last of him. He woke in pieces, eyes first, then a swallow, then a sound that might have been my name if he had known it. Maya held the body cam angle down without crowding his face. "Talk if you can," she said. "Don't waste it if you can't." He tried to laugh at that and coughed instead, a wet, tearing cough that left pink at the corner of his mouth again. I cut farther into the torn side of his suit and peeled the neoprene back from his ribs. The earlier bruising had deepened. There was a fresh rip low along the flank where steel had opened the suit from the outside in. It was not a clean knife line, and not a tearing snag from panic swimming either. The fabric around it was packed with black grit and powdered rust. His fingertips were scored the same way. He had been reaching into metal, not away from it. "Who put you here?" Maya asked. He shook his head once, a tiny movement, all he had. "No," he whispered. "Went down." Another breath, another cough, deep. He shut his eyes hard after that, like language itself was costing him blood. I watched the rhythm of his chest, the angle of the damage, and the way he kept trying to turn toward the steel under the buoy instead of toward open water. That was the part that settled it. Men who got forced under came up fighting for air first, for light, for anything above them. Men who chose the wrong mission over their own survival carried a different pattern. The pressure injury in his lungs had never matched the shallow water story. The damaged suit didn't match a simple struggle cleanly either. Not with the way it was compromised, low and ground through with rust. Not with the bag stripped, the casing cut open, and the last missing weight still unaccounted for. I looked at the steel frame bolted under the buoy, old maintenance bracing with a jagged slot where barnacles and rust had built a rough little cage, deep enough at high water to swallow a man to the chest if he went in after something and the tide still had muscle, deep enough, with panic and bad timing, to pin him just long enough to wreck his lungs when he tried to muscle back up without enough air left to bargain. "You weren't pushed," I said. He looked at me then, really looked, and that was answer enough before he ever made another sound. "You went down after it." His throat worked. Shame moved across his face a lot faster than denial did. Maya glanced from him to the steel and back to me. She didn't interrupt. She could see the line now, too. He got 3 more fragments out before the pain shut him down again. "Crew," he said. Then, after a breath that sounded like broken paper, took most. "1 more. Couldn't let." He stopped there, jaw locked, eyes gone wet. Not from tears, but from the kind of pain that stripped vanity clean off a man. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I had the rest. He had been part of it. He had been skilled enough to run with them, guilty enough to break from them, and desperate enough to dive back down and jam the last core piece into the steel under the buoy where the others couldn't strip it clean before daylight. He had not gone deep because somebody held him there. He had done it to save the evidence, or hide it, maybe both. And in the bargain, he had torn up his own chest and turned himself into the kind of witness nobody trusts until the damage starts making sense. Maya shifted closer to the steel brace, eyes narrowed now, already measuring where the missing piece had to be. The diver sagged against my hand, still alive, still wrecked, and still not done paying for the choice he had made. I looked at the rusted slot beneath the buoy, then back at the man gasping in the mud. He didn't try to save himself first. I went after the core with both hands, because Finesse had left the building an hour ago. The steel bracing under Buoy 7 had eaten enough skin already, and the tide kept slipping lower around us, exposing more jagged metal and less water to hide in. Maya held the light where I needed it and nowhere else. That was a talent. The last piece was wedged under a fold of rusted mesh and old cable, packed in black mud that smelled like rotten eggs, diesel, and dead things that had given up arguing with the marsh. I dug with my fingers first, which was a bad idea. The rusted wire struck the heel of my hand, causing a sharp, burning pain. I hissed, shifted, and went back in anyway. The core moved half an inch, no more. It was enough to tell me it was real. It was not imagined, and not another empty housing or stripped shell. Something dense sat under all that muck, corroded and stubborn, acting as the surviving tooth in a broken jaw. I planted one boot where the mud looked least murderous, braced my shoulder against the buoy stem, and pulled until the tendons in my forearm started singing at me. It came free with a sucking rip that nearly dumped me backward. It was heavy, awkward, and slick, with black slime and veined in white salt bloom, like the marsh had been trying to turn it into part of itself and hadn't finished the meal. Metal edges chewed my palm again before I could shift my grip. Blood trickled into the mud so fast it looked borrowed. Maya crouched in beside me, body cam still blinking red on her chest, and swept the light over the piece while I wiped muck away with the heel of my wrist. It showed corrosion and deep pitting, but it was not ruined all the way. There were numbers stamped along one side under the grime, a connector shorn off clean, and one intact section wrapped in marine tape that had no business surviving this much water. That it? Maya asked. I listened before I answered. The flat had gone strangely organized. I heard no skiff engine and no warning shots, just wind moving over exposed mud and something new, something mechanical and bigger than a small outboard. Then I heard it for what it was. A rising whine, fan-driven and fast. Yeah, I said. And we're out of time. The hovercraft announced itself a second later, its engine notes skimming over the flats like a saw dragged across glass. It came through the fog broad and pale and official, which was somehow worse than the skiff. There was no stealth anymore, and no plausible deniability, just federal clean lines, hard spray skirts, and men in weatherproof gear, standing as if the marsh belonged to the paperwork in their pockets. Commander Sterling stepped off first when they grounded on the firmer edge of the flat. He did not hurry. Men like him almost never did. He moved with that polished kind of calm people practiced in mirrors and command tents, the kind meant to tell everybody else the decision had already been made somewhere higher than argument. His gloves were dry, but mine were not. That felt important in a stupid personal way. Maya stood up before I did and turned enough to keep her camera line open. Sterling's gaze flicked to the core in my hands, to the blood on my palm, then to Maya's chest light, and settled there for half a beat too long. Deputy Torres, he said, you will transfer all recovered material immediately. He offered no hello and no question. Under federal security authority, he added, like the phrase itself could erase everything that had happened before he arrived. I got to my feet slow, because the mud fought harder when you rushed it. Funny, I said. You sound like a man asking for a thing that already has fingerprints on it. He ignored me the way officials ignored weather they couldn't control. Dr. Vance handed over. His tone remained flat and superior. It was not loud enough to be emotional, which made it meaner. Behind him, two of his people spread just wide enough to make the geometry obvious. They were not a rescue team, and were not here for the diver, or for us, but here for possession. Sterling held out one gloved hand as if chain of custody were something he could will into existence by standing straight enough. That was the moment it all went clean inside my head. Not clean morally, but clean structurally. The crew had wanted to erase the thing. Sterling wanted to absorb the erasure, make it administrative, and turn the whole ugly mess into a sealed room with the right signatures missing. He was not hunting truth. He was hunting disappearance. I set the core against my thigh, reached into my jacket with my uncut hand, and pulled out the red evidence bag I had taken from the clinic before dawn. It was waterproof, numbered, and impossible to pretend away once it entered the record. Maya, I said, never taking my eyes off Sterling, keep that camera running. Then I shook the red bag open between us, like a flag nobody in his world wanted to salute yet. The thermal printer started whining before Sterling came through the door. It was thin, mechanical, and impatient. It spat the paperwork out in warm, curling strips that smelled faintly burned, and the sound cut through the clinic office like an insect trapped in fluorescent light. By 10 o'clock, the place had been cleaned, or mostly cleaned, which only made the leftovers stand out harder. Marsh grit still sat in the grooves of my boots. Dried mud cracked on the edge of the desk where I had set the core down before it vanished into proper interim custody. My hand had been wrapped in gauze, tight enough to remind me I still had one. Maya stood near the file cabinet with her body cam live, and her jaw set in that neat, hard line she wore when procedure was the only weapon left that didn't count as fantasy. I filled out the red tag one block at a time, pressing hard enough for the carbon copies beneath it. I noted the date, time, recovery site, condition on acquisition, and visible contamination. Blood had dried in a brown crescent under one thumbnail. The mud still smelled alive. That part pleased me more than it should have. Paper hated mess, but evidence loved it. Sterling waited across from the desk with both hands behind his back, dry again, uniform squared away, and face restored to the kind of composure systems issued in bulk. If humiliation touched him at all, it touched him privately. Good. This was never going to be a public miracle. The order from headquarters had come down while the printer was still coughing out forms. They wanted optics control, immediate chain confirmation, a recorded transfer with 2 signatures, and 1 uninterrupted camera line. Maya read the directive, once without emphasis, and once again with the boredom of somebody making sure a snake understood the shape of the stick pinning its head. Sterling did not react visibly. His temple moved once, which was enough. He could have buried me with delay, with classification, or with a call to somebody whose shoes cost more than the clinic's monthly linens budget. What he could not do now was pretend the handoff had happened in some clean back corridor without witnesses. I slid the form toward him. The paper rasped over the desk. "Before you touch the bag," I said, "you acknowledge site, time, and condition on camera." He looked at me then, properly, and there it was at last. It was not hate, because hate is noisy, but something colder, which was recognition. I had forced him into a shape of truth he couldn't polish. He took one breath. Then headquarters made him smaller. Sterling straightened to full height, heels drawing together with a neat, hard click on the linoleum. The room felt tiny all at once, displaying all glare and reflected metal and the thin electric hum of cheap lights trying not to die. Maya angled her chest, just enough to keep the camera square on him. Sterling raised his right hand to the brim in a salute so exact it almost insulted geometry. He offered no speech, no apology, and no attempt at charm, just the ritual itself, stripped to bone. His jaw flexed once while he held it. Then he dropped the hand, picked up the pen, and signed where I had marked the line. The scratch of the tip across the form sounded rougher than the printer had. He turned the page, signed again for receipt, then set the pen down with ridiculous care, as if precision could save dignity after obedience had already taken its bite. I sealed the core inside the red bag and pushed it toward him. He took it with both hands. That part mattered more than anything he might have said. Systems believed what their hands were forced to record. The moment the transfer was complete, one of the agents outside opened the door, said Sterling's name once, and withdrew. It was not a summons, but a warning, the kind only internal people heard in time. He left without looking back. The door closed behind him, and whatever happened to him next started on the other side of that seal. It would mean internal review, command restriction, and some quiet form of institutional cannibalism dressed up as discipline. It was nothing that would make the news, but plenty that would leave scars in his file if anyone ever got to see the real one. Maya exhaled through her nose and lowered her shoulders a fraction. Then her computer chimed. Mine did the same a second later. Administrative hold orders. Immediate. We were both restricted pending review. Our access cut down to what the system considered survivable. A copy of the incident summary flashed on screen, with a black bar swallowing the central lines where the core should have been described. It was not blurred and not hidden badly, but removed with confidence, leaving partial truth right on schedule. I took out my waterproof marker, pulled the old chart closer, and drew the missing contour back onto the paper by hand. North Flat was not a ghost and not a myth, but just a place the clean version had chosen to forget. The ink bled slightly into the damp fibers and held. Maya watched me do it, then turned her body cam off for the first time all morning. Neither of us said we had won. That would have been childish. We had kept one piece. The rest had already gone under, and the system was still deep enough to drown in.